Hi, St. George's. This week I have been particularly focused on the transformative space when we set aside time to be still and silent and listen to God. It's a discerning space. And I've been sitting with that, of how, with everything that's going on around us and the hecticness and the busyness that gets thrown at us and we allow into our lives, I've been sitting with the power of sitting in God's presence and stillness. I had a friend invite me into this holy space. And how they invited me into it was by asking a question to reflect on. And the question was, what is the metaphor that describes, that depicts how I have experienced this pandemic thus far? It's a beautiful question, because images and metaphors help us process through our emotions in ways that sometimes our words can't help us through. And as I sat with that question in my own life, my metaphor that kept coming back to my heart, that God led me to, was this oak tree. When I was in seminary, Dominique and I had been married just about a year when we went. And we were just embarking on our lives as a married couple, as a family. And we were embarking on our life, our journey together as a family of faith, and what it looks like to live with, one of us being a priest and working in the church. And there's this beautiful oak tree out front of our apartment building. And I don't know why, but God invited me to pick one of those acorns and grow it. So I've been growing this acorn ever since then. And it has come back to me over and over again as a metaphor for my life, and my relationship with God, and the relationship that Dominique and I have together. And it symbolically has grown with us. We've journeyed with this acorn from this little tiny thing to this now sprightly, springy young oak tree that has been following us. And that oak tree, I think, comes to mind in how I understand this pandemic right now. Because when I think of that oak tree, I don't think of just one emotion. It's a complex being of emotions. When I look at it, I experience joy and happiness because I see the immense growth symbolized there that has happened in my relationship with God, the relationship with my husband, and in the relationship with the communities of faith I've been a part of. There's an immense joy and this slow maturation that this tree is symbolically depicting that's going on in my life. And I also experienced the deep pain and the grief that this tree feels, of how with each level of that growing happening, there's pains that come with it. It's stretching out, it's expanding, and it's not easy. It's painful. I particularly feel that this tree has been growing in a pot for like 3 years. And if any of you know anything about trees, the further down the tap root goes, the stronger and healthier it is. And so you don't want it to get root bound. And this tree was starting to get root bound, and it was constrained. It couldn't grow anymore in the pot that it was in. And that's painful. It's painful to be uprooted from that pot. And yet I look at this oak tree and how God worked with me and Dominique into where we were called to go next. And we were called out of Virginia, a place that has been our home our entire lives, has been the home of our families for centuries. But we had outgrown that pot. That oak tree had outgrown that pot. And we were uprooted violently and plopped down in a new place, in a new space. And that's painful. There's grieving that happens in that because everything has changed. And yet, in that pain, there is growth, there is beauty, there is room to stretch out and be more and deeper of who God is calling us to be and grow into that next step of our life. And so now that tree is planted outside of the rectory, no longer root bound, but surrounded by rich soil and dirt in which it can deepen its relationship with creation and with God and grow and expand in our relationship as a couple and here in our ministry together with you all and the family and the roots we are putting down here. We've been taking a walk a lot lately, and just right around the corner from the rectory is this beautiful oak tree, and it's massive. It has to be several hundred years old. And I look at that tree and I imagine the complexity of its life, how it was a day by day, step by step growing, and the joys of that maturation, and the pains and the sadness and the grief that that tree must have experienced in its growing, and what it witnessed in the world around it. And yet, it is still firm. It is rooted. It is here, and it is strong. And yet, it's constantly changing, flexible, and moving with the movements of the Spirit and the world so that it can last longer than just one lifetime, but through the arc of God's time. And so when I think back to our little oak tree that's growing, I experience all of that. And I see that as a perfect metaphor for what I'm personally experiencing in this pandemic. A space where there's immense joy in seeing the maturing and the growth and the newness that God is inviting us into, while at the same time experiencing the pains and the grievings of letting go of what we once were, of who we thought we might be, in order to embrace that new life God is giving us. So I invite you into this exercise because I think it's good for all of us. I invite you today or sometime over the weekend to set aside a space for some stillness and silence with God. And then reflect on that question. What is the metaphor that speaks to how you are journeying through this pandemic right now? I invite you into that. And as you come out of that space and it helps you process and understand what you're going through, share it with your fellow Christians, share it with your family, share it with your church family, so that we may grow together. We may experience our lives moving forward in a new way, that we can celebrate these innumerable joys and also grieve and lament the things that we are losing and having to let go of. So be well, be blessed, and may God be with you in this holy exploration and stillness.